If you ever see your worst enemy drop to one knee in front of the entire campus and beg you not to leave, trust me, you're only seeing the last page of the story. 24 hours earlier, I would have laughed if someone told me Mason Walker would become the biggest problem in my life for reasons that had absolutely nothing to do with our endless rivalry. Mason wasn't just another student at Hawthorne University. He was the captain of the basketball team, the golden boy every freshman recognized before they even memorized where the library was. Professors admired him. Alumni remembered him. Half the campus wanted to be him, and the other half wanted to date him. I belonged to a very different category. I wanted to prove he wasn't as perfect as everyone believed. My name is Landon Hayes, journalism major, editor for the student newspaper, professional collector of inconvenient opinions, and according to Mason, the most annoying person ever accepted into Hawthorne. We had spent 3 years turning every classroom discussion into a competition. Debate tournaments somehow became personal. Group projects became silent wars. Even ordering coffee at the same campus cafe usually ended with one of us walking away determined to outdo the other before sunset. The strange part was that neither of us remembered exactly how the rivalry had started. People loved asking. Our answers changed every time. He stole my parking spot. He mocked my article. I corrected his presentation. He rolled his eyes first. I talked too much. Somewhere along the way, the reasons stopped matching. The rivalry became tradition. Freshmen whispered about us before they ever met us. Seniors placed bets on who would win the next student election, the next debate, or the next ridiculous argument about whether pineapple belonged on pizza. It had become campus entertainment. I hated admitting it, but sometimes I wondered if everyone else enjoyed our rivalry more than we did. Monday mornings always began with student leadership meetings, and unfortunately, Mason and I had both been selected as representatives for our departments. That meant 90 uncomfortable minutes seated across from each other while pretending the other person didn't exist. It never worked. "You're late," I muttered as he slid into the chair opposite mine. He glanced at the wall clock without looking remotely concerned. "I'm 30 seconds early. Only because your watch is optimistic." "Funny," he replied with the faintest smile. "I was about to compliment your haircut." "Don't." I wasn't going to. Across the table, a few students sighed like they had just reached the best part of their favorite TV show. Someone quietly whispered, "Here we go again." Exactly. Here we went again. The meeting barely lasted 10 minutes before we disagreed over funding for the upcoming Fall Welcome Festival. I argued the budget should support student organizations. Mason insisted athletic events attracted more donors. Neither of us raised our voices. We didn't need to. Every sentence felt like a chess move. Every answer invited another challenge. Even Professor Bennett pinched the bridge of his nose before saying, "Can the two of you disagree without turning every conversation into a championship match?" "I'd love to," Mason answered calmly. "So would I." I replied at exactly the same time. The room erupted in laughter. Someone clapped. Someone else recorded the moment on a phone. I rolled my eyes so hard they practically deserved their own diploma. Walking out afterward, I convinced myself nothing unusual had happened. It was another ordinary Monday. Another ordinary argument. Another ordinary reminder that Mason Walker and I would probably spend the rest of college trying to outsmart each other. I had absolutely no idea that before the sun set, the university administration would hand us a solution so unbelievable that pretending to hate each other would suddenly become much easier than pretending we were hopelessly in love. The email from the Office of Student Affairs arrived before I even made it back to the newsroom. Subject line, Mandatory Conduct Review. My stomach dropped exactly half an inch, which was about the average distance it traveled whenever the university administration wanted to have a conversation. I clicked it open, expecting another reminder about respectful communication during student events. Instead, I found a meeting request signed by the dean himself, scheduled for 3 o'clock that afternoon. 2 names appeared beneath the appointment. Mine and Mason Walker's. I actually checked the screen twice to make sure there had not been some administrative mistake. There had not. By the time I reached the administration building, Mason was already standing outside the office with his hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket, looking as relaxed as if he were waiting for a smoothie instead of a disciplinary meeting. He glanced up when I approached. "You too?" he asked. Apparently, they enjoy ruining afternoons in pairs. Try not to blame me before we even walk inside. I make no promises. The receptionist smiled with suspicious enthusiasm. The dean will see you now. That was never a comforting sentence. Dean Whitmore folded his hands neatly across his desk as we sat down. Beside him, Professor Bennett looked like he had lost several hours of sleep because of us. A large monitor behind them displayed screenshots from dozens of social media posts. There were clips from debates, photos of us arguing outside classrooms, memes comparing us to divorced parents fighting over custody of the student body, and one particularly embarrassing video that had accumulated nearly 2 million views over the weekend. It showed Mason catching me before I tripped over a backpack outside the student center. Out of context, it looked almost affectionate. The internet had supplied the rest of the story on its own. "Gentlemen," Dean Whitmore began, "you have become unexpectedly famous." I crossed my arms. "For all the wrong reasons." "Not entirely," he replied. "Applications to Hawthorne have increased since these videos began circulating." Mason frowned. "That cannot be serious." "It is completely serious." Professor Bennett cleared his throat. "Students are invested in the narrative surrounding the two of you." "Narrative?" I repeated. "You mean rumors." "Call them what you like," the dean said calmly. "The attention is significant." I exchanged a confused glance with Mason. For the first time in years, neither of us had a clever response. Dean Whitmore leaned forward. "Next month, Hawthorne launches its National Campus Ambassador campaign. Several sponsors have already asked whether the two of you will appear together." Mason blinked. "Together?" "Very much together." Silence settled across the room. The dean slid a printed proposal toward us. My eyes stopped on one sentence, and I honestly wondered whether I had accidentally walked into a hidden camera show. The university believed the best way to control the rumors was to embrace them through a carefully managed public relations campaign built around the image of two student leaders overcoming differences. Public appearances, interviews, promotional videos, campus events. Every single activity described us not as rivals, but as a couple. I looked up so quickly my chair squeaked against the floor. "You cannot possibly expect us to pretend we are dating." Dean Whitmore smiled with terrifying confidence. "Actually, Mr. Hayes, that is exactly what we expect." For exactly 12 seconds, neither Mason nor I said a single word. The office became so quiet that I could hear the old grandfather clock outside the hallway marking each passing second like it was personally enjoying our misery. Finally, I laughed. It was the kind of laugh people made when reality stopped making sense. "No," I said, shaking my head. "Absolutely not." Mason nodded once. "I agree." Dean Whitmore did not even blink. "This is not a negotiation." "Good," I replied. "Because I am declining." "So am I," Mason added. Professor Bennett let out a slow sigh that suggested he had predicted this exact reaction. "Then perhaps you should hear the rest." Dean Whitmore folded another document across the desk. "The student newspaper receives university funding." My eyes immediately landed on the highlighted paragraph. "Budget review. Suspension pending." My heartbeat slowed for all the wrong reasons. He turned another page toward Mason. "The athletic department has similar conditions tied to donor relations." Mason's expression changed almost imperceptibly. It was the first crack I had ever seen in his perfectly controlled composure. His basketball program depended on the same campaign sponsors now asking for campus ambassadors. "You cannot be serious," he said quietly. "Completely serious," the dean answered. "Neither of you is being punished. You are being asked to participate in a public relations opportunity that benefits everyone." I leaned back in my chair and rubbed my forehead. "You are asking two people who cannot survive 5 minutes in the same room without arguing to convince thousands of people we are dating." "Exactly," Professor Bennett replied. "If you can manage a debate tournament together, surely you can survive smiling for a few photographs." I looked at Mason. He looked at me. For one painfully awkward moment, we shared the exact same horrified expression. It was strangely unsettling to discover that my greatest rival apparently made the same face when trapped. Dean Whitmore slid a schedule across the table. "Your first appearance is Friday afternoon." I scanned the list. Campus welcome video. Charity fundraiser. Alumni dinner. Homecoming parade. Social media interviews. Weekly live streams. A professional photo session. There were enough joint appearances to make us look inseparable. Weekly live streams. I repeated. "People watch those." "Last year's ambassador videos averaged 200,000 views," Professor Bennett answered. This year's projections are significantly higher. Of course they were. Somewhere outside that office, students were probably already creating hashtags about us. Mason cleared his throat. Suppose we agree. I turned toward him so quickly that my neck almost protested. Suppose. He ignored me and continued speaking to the dean. How long does this arrangement last? Until the end of the semester. I nearly fell out of my chair. For months. For months, the dean confirmed pleasantly. I looked at Mason again. Tell me you are not actually considering this. His jaw tightened. I am considering what happens if the basketball program loses funding. I hated how reasonable that sounded. Unfortunately, he looked just as frustrated when he answered. I assume you are thinking about the newspaper. I opened my mouth to deny it. Then I closed it again. He was right. Every freshman reporter who worked with me depended on that budget. Losing it would hurt dozens of students who had nothing to do with our rivalry. The silence stretched between us until Dean Whitmore placed 2 identical folders on the desk. Inside you will find your public relationship guidelines. I stared at the cover. Public relationship guidelines. It sounded less like college and more like an instruction manual for surviving an alternate universe. Mason reached for his folder at the exact same moment I reached for mine. Our hands bumped lightly against the table. We both pulled back as though the contact had surprised us. Do not get used to this, I muttered under my breath. Mason gave the smallest smile I had ever seen on his face. Trust me, Hayes. I was about to say the exact same thing. Friday arrived much faster than either of us wanted. At exactly 9 o'clock that morning, Mason and I stood outside the university media studio while a cheerful marketing coordinator named Olivia bounced toward us, carrying 2 garment bags and enough enthusiasm to power the entire campus. Good morning, you two, she said brightly. Today is going to be adorable. Mason looked at me. I looked at him. Neither of us had the energy to explain how terrifying that sentence sounded. Olivia handed each of us a schedule. Hair and makeup, wardrobe consultation, promotional photographs, video interviews, campus walk, group lunch, social media content. By the bottom of the page, I felt emotionally exhausted before the day had even begun. Rule number 1. Olivia announced as we entered the studio. No glaring at each other. She pointed directly at me. You. Then she pointed at Mason. Especially you. I am not glaring, I replied. Your face naturally argues with people, Mason said without hesitation. Olivia clapped once. Perfect. Save that chemistry for the cameras. We both groaned at the exact same time. The first photo session was somehow worse than every nightmare I had imagined. Stand closer, the photographer called. We moved approximately 3 inches. Closer. Another inch. Closer. Mason sighed quietly before stepping beside me until our shoulders almost touched. I could hear him breathing. It was oddly distracting. Great, the photographer said. Now smile at each other. I forced something that probably resembled dental discomfort. Mason's expression looked equally painful. The photographer lowered his camera. You two look like you are negotiating a hostage exchange. Olivia pinched the bridge of her nose. Think happy thoughts. I answered. Then I got here. Mason let out a laugh before he could stop himself. It was short, genuine, and completely unexpected. Every camera in the room immediately clicked. There, the photographer shouted excitedly. That smile. Do it again. Mason instantly returned to his usual calm expression. Too late, he said. The next hour became an endless collection of impossible instructions. Walk together. Talk naturally. Pretend nobody was filming. Sit on the campus lawn. Share a joke. Look comfortable. Every attempt felt painfully artificial until something unexpected happened during a break. Olivia handed me a cup of iced coffee without realizing the lid had not been secured properly. The moment I picked it up, the cup tilted. Before I could react, Mason caught it with one quick movement, keeping the coffee from spilling across my shirt. Careful, he said automatically. Thanks, I answered just as automatically. We froze. Neither of us had planned that exchange. It had simply happened. Hold that, the photographer yelled from across the courtyard. We turned toward him in confusion. Do not move. More cameras clicked rapidly. Students walking between classes slowed down to watch. Someone whispered, they are actually kind of cute together. Another student immediately answered, I told you they were secretly dating. Within minutes, phones appeared everywhere. Photos spread across social media faster than either of us could understand. By lunchtime, Our names had climbed to the top of the campus trending page. The comments multiplied by the second. Some students celebrated. Others claimed they had predicted everything years ago. A few insisted our old arguments had obviously been unresolved romantic tension all along. I nearly choked on my sandwich reading that one. Mason quietly slid his phone across the table toward me. The official university account had already uploaded our photographs. Thousands of likes. Hundreds of comments. Tens of thousands of views. I stared at the screen before looking back at him. This cannot possibly be working. Mason glanced around the crowded student center where dozens of people were smiling at us instead of expecting another argument. Then he looked back at me with an expression I could not quite read. That is the problem, he said quietly. I think it is. The following Monday, campus no longer looked the same. It looked like it had quietly decided Mason Walker and I belonged together, and nobody had bothered asking either of us for permission. Students smiled when we walked past. Someone held the library door open for both of us with a grin that made me deeply suspicious. The barista at the campus coffee shop placed 2 drinks on the counter before either of us had even ordered. Your usuals, she said cheerfully. I blinked. We do not have usuals. She laughed. Sure you do. Mason picked up his coffee without arguing. Thank you. I stared at him. You are encouraging this. I am choosing my battles. That is disappointingly mature. I am full of surprises. The words lingered in my head longer than they should have. We were halfway across the quad when Olivia hurried toward us carrying a clipboard. Perfect timing, she said. The homecoming preview festival starts in 20 minutes. There is just one tiny change. I had already learned that whenever Olivia described something as tiny, it usually became a life-altering inconvenience. What changed? I asked cautiously. A student group announced they are offering $1,000 to anyone who can prove your relationship is fake. Mason stopped walking. They are doing what? Olivia gave an apologetic smile. Apparently, they think the university campaign is staged. I folded my arms. Because it is staged. Exactly. Which means nobody can find out. She lowered her voice. There are already students planning to ask trick questions, separate you during interviews, and watch how you interact when you think nobody is paying attention. I looked around the crowded campus. Suddenly, every passing student felt like an undercover detective. This has officially become ridiculous, I muttered. Mason quietly nodded. Agreed. The festival opened with music, food trucks, and hundreds of alumni wandering across the lawn. Mason and I were scheduled to welcome visitors from the main stage before spending the afternoon greeting prospective students. Everything went surprisingly well until we reached the student activities booth. A senior named Tyler, famous for exposing campus rumors, stepped directly into our path with a microphone and a camera crew behind him. Mind answering a quick question? He asked with a grin that practically announced trouble. Depends on the question, I replied. Tyler smiled even wider. Simple. Couples know little details about each other. Mason, what is Landon's favorite dessert? Mason answered almost immediately. New York cheesecake. I stared at him. Tyler turned to me. Your turn. What is Mason's lucky number before every basketball game? 23. I answered without thinking. Tyler's eyebrows lifted. Interesting. Before I could explain that everyone on campus knew Mason's jersey number, Tyler fired another question. Who apologized first after your last argument? Mason and I answered together. Nobody. Laughter erupted from the crowd. Phones appeared in every direction. Tyler frowned slightly before trying again. What annoys you most about each other? I opened my mouth. Mason looked at me. Something unexpected passed between us. The strange awareness that if either of us answered honestly, the entire performance might collapse. He overthinks everything. Mason finally said with the faintest smile. I shrugged. He pretends not to. The crowd laughed again, but this time the laughter sounded warm instead of skeptical. Tyler lowered his microphone, visibly disappointed. I was hoping for something more dramatic. Sorry, Mason replied. You caught us on a good day. As Tyler walked away, several students began clapping. Someone shouted, You two are relationship goals. I nearly tripped over absolutely nothing. Later that afternoon, while the festival slowly wound down, I stepped backstage searching for a quiet place to breathe. That was when I noticed Mason's phone resting unattended on a folding chair. The screen lit up with a notification before I could look away. A photo album appeared beneath the message preview. Its title was only 3 words long. Do not open. And the cover image looked unmistakably familiar. It was me. I should have looked away. Any decent person would have. Instead, I stood frozen beside the folding chair, while Mason's phone screen remained illuminated for only a few more seconds. The notification disappeared before I could read anything else, leaving behind that single image burned into my memory. My face. Smiling. Not posed. Not one of the official campaign photographs. It looked candid, as if someone had captured an ordinary moment without me noticing. I stepped back just as Mason's voice echoed from the hallway behind the stage. Have you seen my phone? Every instinct I had screamed at me to pretend nothing had happened. It is on the chair, I answered, keeping my voice as steady as possible. He walked over, picked it up, and slipped it into his pocket without checking the screen. Thanks. He studied my face for a brief moment. You look like you have a question. I am just tired, I lied. Mason nodded slowly, though I had the uncomfortable feeling he did not believe me. Long day. Very long. We walked back toward the main lawn together, but something had shifted inside my head. For the first time since this ridiculous arrangement began, my curiosity outweighed my frustration. Why would Mason have a private album with my picture on the cover? The question followed me through dinner, through my evening writing assignment, and all the way into the next morning. Sleep did not help. If anything, it made the mystery louder. By Wednesday afternoon, our ambassador schedule included filming inside the library. During a break, Olivia disappeared to answer a phone call, leaving Mason and me alone in one of the quiet study rooms. He sat across from me reviewing notes for an upcoming economics exam, while I pretended to edit an article that I had reread 6 times without absorbing a single sentence. You have been staring at the same paragraph for 10 minutes, Mason said without looking up. Occupational hazard. You only tap your pen like that when something is bothering you. I stopped tapping immediately. You noticed that? Unfortunately. I frowned. Since when? He looked up from his notebook with the calm expression that always made him impossible to read. Since freshman year. That answer landed much harder than he seemed to realize. Before I could ask another question, Olivia returned carrying 2 campus volunteers and another impossible schedule. The conversation dissolved before it could become anything more. Later that afternoon, while we filmed outside the student union, an unexpected rain shower scattered everyone across the courtyard. Equipment was rushed under tents. Students laughed as they sprinted toward the nearest buildings. I ducked beneath the entrance awning just as Mason caught up beside me, slightly out of breath. Looks like filming is over, I said. For today. A small cardboard box sitting near the information desk caught my attention. It held old promotional materials from previous years. One binder had fallen onto the floor, spilling photographs across the tile. I bent down to help gather them. Mason knelt beside me without saying a word. As I stacked the pictures, one photograph slipped free and landed face up between us. It showed the freshman orientation welcome ceremony from 3 years earlier. Hundreds of new students filled the lawn. Near the center of the picture stood me, looking completely overwhelmed on my first day. Just a few feet behind me was Mason. He was not talking to anyone else. He was looking directly at me. Not by accident. Not in passing. Directly. I slowly turned the photograph over. Printed on the back was the date from our very first week on campus. My heartbeat stumbled. I had always believed our rivalry started months later during an academic debate. But this picture suggested something impossible. Mason had noticed me long before either of us had exchanged a single word. The photograph stayed in my backpack for 2 days. I told myself I had simply forgotten to return it to the marketing office, but the truth was far more embarrassing. I kept taking it out whenever I was alone, studying every tiny detail like it contained the answer to a question I had never thought to ask. The more I looked at it, the less my old version of history made sense. If Mason had noticed me during freshman orientation, then our rivalry had not been the beginning. It had been something else entirely. Friday afternoon arrived with another ambassador event, this time a charity basketball exhibition where students could challenge members of the varsity team. The gym buzzed with music, laughter, and far too many cameras. Olivia greeted us with her usual unstoppable energy. "Smile," she whispered. "The live stream starts in 60 seconds. Mason adjusted the microphone clip to his shirt while I forced myself to stop thinking about the photograph. We welcomed viewers, answered questions from prospective students, and somehow survived another 20 minutes without accidentally exposing the truth. Everything seemed almost comfortable until the live stream host announced a surprise segment. Time for our couple compatibility challenge. I nearly dropped my cue cards. Mason closed his eyes for exactly 1 second, as though silently negotiating with fate. A volunteer rolled out a small table holding 2 whiteboards and matching markers. You will answer questions separately, the host explained. If your answers match, you score a point. The audience cheered. I considered pretending to faint. The first question appeared on the large screen. Favorite season? We both wrote fall. Laughter and applause filled the gym. Next question. Dream vacation? We both wrote the Pacific Northwest. I stared at Mason. He stared back with the exact same confused expression. Lucky guesses, I muttered. Probably, he answered, sounding far less convinced than before. The questions continued. Morning person or night owl? Favorite campus building? Coffee or tea? Every answer matched. By the end of the game, the crowd was practically celebrating for us. That is a perfect score, the host announced. Either these two know each other incredibly well, or destiny is doing some heavy lifting. I laughed awkwardly, but inside I felt something quietly shifting. Maybe I knew Mason better than I wanted to admit. Maybe he knew me far better than I had ever realized. After the event ended, we walked across campus in unusual silence. The autumn breeze carried fallen leaves across the brick path between the gym and the student center. Did you cheat? I finally asked. Mason looked genuinely offended. No. Then how did you know I have always wanted to visit Olympic National Park? He slipped his hands into his jacket pockets. You wrote about it in your first newspaper column during freshman year. I blinked. You read that? Every issue. My steps slowed. Why? Mason hesitated for the first time since I had known him. He looked ahead instead of at me. Because I liked the way you wrote. My heart forgot its rhythm for one impossible second. Before I could respond, his phone vibrated. He checked the screen, and every trace of warmth disappeared from his expression. I have to take this. He stepped several feet away, speaking quietly enough that I could not hear the conversation. When he returned a minute later, his face had settled back into the calm mask everyone on campus recognized. Everything okay? I asked. Just team business, he replied too quickly. Then he added, go ahead without me. I watched him disappear toward the athletic center before turning toward the journalism building. Halfway there, my own phone buzzed with a notification from an anonymous account. Attached was a single video file and one sentence beneath it. If you really want to know why Mason has been lying to you for 3 years, watch this before someone deletes it. My thumb hovered over the play button for nearly 10 seconds. Every instinct told me to delete the anonymous message and pretend it had never arrived. Instead, curiosity won. I tapped the screen. The video opened with security camera footage from the student union during our freshman year. The timestamp confirmed it had been recorded only 3 weeks after orientation. There I was, carrying an overloaded stack of books that completely blocked my view. I remembered the day immediately because I had dropped almost everything in front of the staircase and spent 15 embarrassing minutes gathering scattered notebooks while students walked around me. Back then I had blamed bad luck. The video told a different story. A student I barely recognized stepped into my path on purpose, reaching out just enough to bump the books from my arms before quickly disappearing into the crowd. Seconds later, Mason entered the frame. He was the first person to kneel beside me, quietly helping collect every notebook before anyone else reacted. He handed me the last book, smiled briefly, and walked away before I could even thank him. My memory suddenly returned with painful clarity. I had assumed he was laughing at me because a group nearby had started laughing at the exact same moment. I never looked back to see that Mason had not laughed at all. The video ended. Another clip began automatically. This one came from the following semester outside the debate hall. I watched myself storm away after losing an argument with Mason, convinced he had embarrassed me in front of everyone. The camera angle revealed something I had never seen. Before the debate even started, another student had quietly edited the presentation schedule, placing my unfinished draft on the screen instead of the final version I had submitted. Mason noticed the mistake during the debate and redirected the discussion to protect me from looking unprepared. I had mistaken his interruption for arrogance when it had actually covered someone else's sabotage. My stomach tightened. There were more clips. Too many. Small misunderstandings. Half-heard conversations. Moments that looked completely different from another angle. At the end of the final video appeared one frozen frame and a typed message. You were never enemies by accident. Someone wanted you to become enemies. Before I could process those words, my phone rang. Olivia. I answered immediately. Landon, where are you? She asked, sounding unusually anxious. Walking back from the journalism building. What? Do not post anything. Do not answer reporters. Just come to the administration office. My heartbeat quickened. Reporters? She hesitated. Someone leaked internal campaign documents. I stopped walking. What documents? The ambassador agreement. The world seemed to pause around me. Students continued crossing the quad, laughing, carrying backpacks, completely unaware that everything around me had just shifted. People know the relationship is fake? I asked quietly. Everyone knows, Olivia answered. The documents are all over social media. By the time I reached the administration building, television vans had already parked outside the front entrance. Students crowded the sidewalks, staring at their phones. My own screen exploded with notifications faster than I could read them. Some comments accused us of lying. Others blamed the university. A few insisted Mason and I had manipulated everyone for attention. Inside the conference room, Dean Whitmore looked exhausted. Professor Bennett rubbed his forehead in silence. Mason stood near the window with his back to the room. He turned only when I entered. His expression remained calm, but his eyes carried a weight I had never noticed before. Dean Whitmore finally spoke. We have identified the source of the leak. Before anyone else could say another word, Mason took one step forward. No, he said quietly. Tell them it was me. Every head in the room turned toward him. My breath caught. I leaked the documents. Mason continued evenly. Leave everyone else out of it. Whatever consequences follow, I will accept them alone. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. The room felt suspended between one heartbeat and the next. I stared at Mason, waiting for him to smile. To admit this was another impossible plan, another calculated move to protect the campaign. He never did. Dean Whitmore slowly stood. Mason, he said carefully, our investigation has not concluded. It does not need to, Mason replied. The responsibility is mine. Professor Bennett frowned. You understand what this could mean for your position, your scholarship, and your team? Mason nodded once. I do. I finally found my voice. Stop saying that. Every pair of eyes turned toward me. You did not leak anything. Mason looked at me with the same calm expression he always wore whenever he had already made up his mind. Landon. No. I stepped closer before he could finish. I watched the videos. Something changed in his face. Not panic. Not fear. Just surprise. I know about freshman year. I continued quietly. I know someone manipulated the debate schedule. I know you were helping me while I spent 3 years believing the exact opposite. Silence settled over the conference room again. Dean Whitmore exchanged a confused glance with Professor Bennett, but neither interrupted. Mason lowered his eyes for a brief moment before letting out a slow breath. You were never supposed to see those. Why? I asked. Because then you would know the truth. His answer was almost a whisper, and I was afraid the truth would make things even harder. Harder than pretending to hate each other for 3 years. A faint, almost embarrassed smile appeared on his face. Believe it or not, yes. I shook my head, still trying to understand everything that had happened. Why would you take the blame for something you did not do? Mason looked directly at me. Because if someone had to lose everything today, I would rather it be me than you. The words landed with a quiet honesty that left no room for misunderstanding. Before anyone else could speak, Olivia hurried into the room holding a tablet. Wait, she said breathlessly. The university's cybersecurity office traced the leak. She looked from Mason to the dean. It did not come from either of them. Dean Whitmore accepted the tablet and quickly scanned the report. His shoulders relaxed almost immediately. The files were accessed through a compromised alumni account, he announced. Neither Mr. Walker nor Mr. Hayes was responsible. Relief swept through the room so suddenly that it almost felt unreal. Mason closed his eyes for one brief second before exhaling. Professor Bennett laughed softly. Well, that certainly changes things. It changed everything. A week later, after the investigation ended and the real source of the leak was officially identified, the university held its annual fall celebration on the central lawn. Students filled every walkway beneath strings of warm lights, while music drifted through the crisp evening air. The ambassador campaign had been rewritten to focus on honesty rather than perfection, and somehow the campus responded even more warmly than before. Mason found me near the fountain just as the event was beginning to wind down. "There is something I should have said a long time ago," he admitted. "You do not owe me anything," I answered. "Maybe not." He smiled nervously, a version of Mason Walker I had never seen before. "But I still want to say it." To my complete surprise, he stepped forward and lowered himself onto one knee. Gasps echoed across the lawn as conversations stopped around us. Phones immediately appeared in every direction. I could only stare. "You once told me that if I ever stopped treating everything like a competition, I might finally say what I actually meant," Mason said. "So here it is. I never wanted to be your rival. I noticed you on our first day at Hawthorne, and somewhere along the way I convinced myself pretending to compete with you was safer than admitting I admired you." My heart pounded so loudly I barely heard the crowd anymore. Mason looked up with the smallest hopeful smile. "Our fake relationship is over. But if you are willing, I would really like the chance to build something real." I laughed, partly because I was overwhelmed and partly because the opening words of this unbelievable story suddenly returned to me. "You know," I said, reaching out my hand, "this is definitely not how I expected my worst enemy to ask me out." He slipped his hand into mine and stood. "Good," he replied with a grin that finally reached his eyes. "Then maybe we have both been wrong about each other from the very beginning." As the crowd erupted into applause and the campus lights shimmered against the autumn sky, I realized the greatest rivalry of my college life had never been about winning. It had always been about two stubborn people taking the longest possible path toward the place where they had quietly belonged all along.